Hello, comrades. So today we are responding to one of the worst media analyses I have ever seen. Lord Farquaad was right by Type 2 Productions. It's basically what happens when you try to analyze Shrek looking for a far right message. How do you interpret Shrek if you want a king with unchecked power to remove all of the people you don't like from your country?
People may counter what we're saying by saying, "Oh, well, Farquaad's an egomaniac." But I would say, given the circumstances, is that not warranted? Like, if Trump deported all the illegals, cleaned up all the major cities, and got rid of the Fent zombies, I would happily worship him as the god emperor of mankind. I wish Trump were like Farquaad.
But the analysis does raise an important question for me. Did they reach their conclusion because they saw, or didn't see what I saw, or because they saw the same things and held different values? And if you haven't seen Shrek, I mean, really, what are you doing with your life? Stop this video right now, go watch Shrek, it's a masterpiece, and come back and watch the rest of this video. But if you're still watching without having seen the movie, or if it's just been a really long time, the gist is that there's a Lord Farquaad, who banishes all of the fairy tale creatures in the kingdom to an ogre's swamp. The ogre, trying to get his land back, goes on a quest with the talking donkey to rescue a princess, Princess Fiona, for Farquaad to marry, but the ogre, Shrek, falls in love with Fiona, who's secretly cursed to turn into an ogre at night until she finds true love, at which point she will take the form of true love. The two ditch Lord Farquaad. Actually, he gets eaten by the donkey's love interest, a fire-breathing dragon. Shrek discovers the power of friendship and love and marries Fiona. She takes the form of true love, expecting to just be, her human self, the princess self, for all eternity. But she turns into an ogre for all time. But obviously, this isn't a problem with Shrek, and they both learn to love and accept themselves as ogres. As I said, it's a masterpiece. Overall, the message of the movie is that beauty is on the inside. We shouldn't reject people from society for superficial reasons, and the monarchy is bad, I guess. Overall, not a super complicated message, which is to be expected from a kids' movie, honestly. But what happens when we analyze Shrek and also hate minorities? Part 1, Lord Farquaad is good, actually, apparently. So, all of that was wrong, really.
It is very clear that Shrek is inarguably subversive in ways that we just didn't realize when we were young.
Calling Shrek subversive makes it sound like someone hunting commies in the 1950s, which I thought was pretty funny. I also have to point out that Shrek is in fact not tearing out pages out of the hero's journey, but rather the very story he's about to live through. This bit makes it seem like the people at Type 2 Productions don't actually know what the hero's journey is or understand basic story structure. The opening scene where Shrek tears the page from the fairy tales serves a few functions. It establishes the world as one with fairy tale creatures and one in which true love has some kind of magical power. It shows Shrek's cynicism about love, and it establishes a comedic tone for the movie. But let's get on to the main point.
And after watching Shrek again, I came to the realization that Farquaad was like totally right and totally justified in just about everything that he did.
And I think a big part of it is, regardless of the actual actions he made, the film paints him as bad. As a kid or a less discerning adult, you're not even paying attention to what he actually did or the motivation behind it. It's just, oh, the music came on to tell you he's bad. Oh, we know he's the villain.
This is an important part of the thesis, really. We need to pay attention to Lord Farquaad's actions and the motivations behind those actions, not just the framing of those actions. Doing something good with evil music playing in the background doesn't make you evil.
Farquaad is the only character with any selfless motivation in the entire movie. Because one of the things you see about Farquaad very quickly on is that his entire motivation is based around making Duloc, his own personal kingdom, as perfect as it can possibly be. Yet the show is constantly making fun of him or throwing ad hominems at him or attacking him when he's right.
I'm not quite sure what they mean by ad hominem here. It's a movie, it's not a formal argument. The characters within the movie can insult Farquaad, but the movie itself can't. The characters do make fun of him some, but nobody ever says he is incorrect because of an insult, which would be an actual ad hominem attack. So it's starting to look like the people at Type 2 Productions might not have the best grasp on what an ad hominem actually is. They also say that it's clear that Farquaad's entire motivation is making his kingdom perfect, but that's simply not true. Marrying a princess would make him a king, and thus his, I guess we'll call it a principality, a real kingdom, but it wouldn't actually improve the kingdom itself in any meaningful way for the people that live there. It just changes the title, and the title is apparently really important to him, but there's really no evidence it's important to anyone else. They also fail to establish how getting rid of the fairy tale creatures would actually make his kingdom better. Actually, let's go to the one part where they try to justify this opinion.
Farquaad doesn't state how they've poisoned the world, so it leads you to wonder. But then you look at what these fairy tale creatures do, and it's like, oh, I see how he came to that conclusion. Because whenever these fairy tale creatures arrive at Shrek's house, you wanna know the first thing they do? They invade his home, they vandalize it, they lock him out of his own house. These people are a nuisance.
So the reason it's okay to kick out an entire group of people is that because once they've already been kicked out, a small portion of them vandalize the place they've been forced onto without realizing that it belonged to someone else. Surely, it would be cheaper, more effective, and more just to simply try them for their crimes individually if they were actually criminals. Even still, banishment isn't a fair punishment for vandalism, otherwise, we should send ICE into our middle schools to deport a fifth of our seventh graders. This kind of group punishment cannot be benevolent, especially when it's so disproportionate to the crime and the number of people within the group that supposedly commit that crime. This kind of thing can only be explained by an unjustified prejudice. There is no motivation that can justify this crime. I actually thought this video had to be satire watching the beginning of it, but looking at the rest of the video and the channel, it unfortunately seems like they are serious. So let's hear some more about how Farquaad actually isn't a bad guy.
Even if his methods aren't ideal. But also consider what he could have done. Farquaad could have resorted to more extreme methods like enslavement or even exterminatus, but instead, this dude opts peacefully to relocate these guys.
This point is completely deranged. Basically, he's a good guy because he only did ethnic cleansing and he didn't do a full genocide when he coulda. Forcefully relocating an entire group of people isn't peaceful. That's why it's called the Trail of Tears and not the Trail of Andrew Jackson was a peaceful guy. This point doesn't help show how his motivations excuse his actions. They just show how he was capable of actions that were worse. Imagine if you were on trial for assault and instead of trying to claim self-defense or something, you say, "Your Honor, it wasn't that bad. I could have killed the guy."
But oh man, the writers desperately want you to hate Farquaad. And you see this almost instantly because they introduce him to you in a scene where he's torturing the gingerbread man. Now, if you ignore a lot of the context surrounding this, you could believe that he's a bad guy. He tells you what he's doing and why he's doing it. The only reason he is torturing the gingerbread man is to find out where the rest of the fairy tale creatures are.
Torturing an innocent person isn't justified to find someone else. That shouldn't be a hot take. Furthermore, as we've established, there's no justification for hunting down the other fairy tale creatures. So even if you think torture can be justified with the right motivations, his overall motivations aren't even a justification in this instance. And Lord Farquaad actually seems to enjoy torturing. He isn't angst-ridden, doing a necessary evil for the good of his people. He's just a sadist torturing someone so that he can remove more people from his country without justification or due process. And as an aside, conservatives always talk about how they love the US Constitution, but it seems like for some odd reason they are always trying to justify cruel and unusual punishment, as well as punishment without due process.
Now, the only exception that you could point to and say, okay, Farquaad's out of line for doing this is wrong. The only exception is he kills the mama bear, which he uses to make a rug. And yeah, that definitely feels forced and out of character for Farquaad, but even so, I'm still willing to say that he deserved to spoil himself for a job well done. Look at how clean Duloc is. Did he not deserve this?
Yeah, if the cost is that he killed a bear, what are we talking about? But on top of that, if you're going to use that as evidence that he's evil for making a rug out of the bear, which ostensibly would be a threat to him because he kicked them out and exiled them, but how much more evil then are Shrek and Fiona for turning a random frog and snake who are of no threat to them into balloon animals and sending them into outer space?
This is another unhinged take. It's just not justifiable. I'm actually surprised that they are talking about this because it's just a visual gag that passes by for a few seconds, and I think a reasonable person could say in their analysis that it's mostly a joke and not an important part of the movie, but they want to justify it, so let's go. Basically, their position is that it's okay to do a little bit of murder if you keep the streets clean. They also say that his motivations are selfless to help his kingdom, but the murder of Mama Bear to make a carpet betrays selfish intent. It's only for his personal gain, which undermines the entire thesis of their video. Hopefully, I shouldn't have to explain why murdering someone isn't okay just because the streets are clean, but here we are. They also try to explain it away with this weird whataboutism where Fiona and Shrek kill a frog and a snake, which completely misses a core aspect of the movie. The fairy tale creatures in this movie are full characters. They are people. Random animals are not, they're just animals. Killing a snake or a frog is no worse than eating meat in this universe, but killing Mama Bear is killing an actual person, and killing her is murder. They also seem to imply that it was in self-defense because Mama Bear was ostensibly a threat to him. But your prisoner isn't a threat to you, so that point kind of falls flat. There's nothing within the movie that even remotely comes close to justifying this. They say this seems out of character for Lord Farquaad, but it really doesn't. This is someone who engaged in what basically seems to be ethnic cleansing, ordering Shrek's death the first time he saw him, seemingly just because he thought Shrek was hideous. He also orders the guards to take Fiona when he finds out that she used hers to turn into an ogre, which doesn't betray good intent either. And he said to his soldiers when he was sending them out to go hunt for the princess, "Some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make." This is not the kind of person who seems like he would be above murder. But let's look at the other positive qualities, things that don't involve the removal of the fairy tale creatures.
Because we see that after Shrek completes Farquaad's quest and delivers Fiona back to him, Farquaad honors his deal with Shrek despite having no reason to hold up his end of the bargain. Because we've seen he doesn't like fairy tale creatures, yet he is still honorable enough to relocate them.
This seems like another weird point. I don't think it takes any kind of good character or moral courage to keep a deal you made. This is just Farquaad grudgingly not doing a bad thing. It's not the same as doing a good thing. But throughout the video, they say he is a good leader. So what is the argument for him being a good leader?
And what's funny is the mirror that Farquaad brings in, whenever Farquaad says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, is this not the most perfect kingdom of them all?" The mirror doesn't say, "You know what, this kingdom actually sucks." The mirror says, "Well, yeah, it's fine, you're just not a king." He doesn't reject the claim that Duloc is perfect. He doesn't. He only rejects the claim that Farquaad's a king.
This is actually just a misrepresentation of what the mirror says. The mirror says that it's not technically a kingdom, but doesn't say that if he were a king, it would be the best kingdom. Given that the mirror is a fairy tale creature that is being threatened, it's possible that the mirror simply avoided saying an unpleasant truth, that the kingdom isn't that great, by pointing towards a technicality of the question. As the mirror doesn't say the kingdom is either good or bad, what other evidence do we have?
Also keep in mind that the villagers were insanely entertained by this. Like, not only is he providing safety and security, but also entertainment. Come on now.
I think they're missing something really important here. The villagers are cheering at the beginning of the fight, not just because they're entertained, because Lord Farquaad is such a great leader. They are cheering in the beginning of the fight because the hangman is holding up a sign telling them to cheer. This is a repeated joke in the movie, and the implications that the villagers will be punished if they didn't cheer, and if they don't say what they are told to say. The villagers not only lack the freedom to say what they want, but are actively forced to say what the king tells them to. At the beginning of the fight, there are some people cheering against Shrek, but the vast majority are cheering for Shrek, and against Lord Farquaad's soldiers towards the end, suggesting that Lord Farquaad and his soldiers aren't actually that popular. But there is one good thing about Lord Farquaad that they mention quite a few times.
Now, what's even better about this is it appears as though Farquaad has been successful and has made Duloc a truly perfect place. And that's evidenced by the fact that the city is pristine. It's clean, it's orderly, it's safe, it's prosperous. You don't have fent zombies running around everywhere.
This is like when people say at least the trains run on time when trying to defend Mussolini. Yeah, the city looks kinda nice and orderly, but that doesn't actually mean people have a high standard of living, or that Lord Farquaad is personally responsible for the cleanliness. Furthermore, surely there would be a way of keeping the city clean without committing grave injustices.
After Donkey rides in and has Dragon eat Farquaad, the villagers even clap at Donkey's joke about Farquaad's death. This is so jarring when you consider that, based on the little we see of Duloc, it genuinely seems like poverty and crime doesn't exist here. The one wide shot we see of the city outside of the church paints this city as pristine. It looks like an amazing place to live.
So the city does seem clean, but I have no idea why they seem to think that crime and poverty don't exist. In all the shots of the city, it's completely empty, presumably because all the villagers are legally mandated to attend the competition between the knights. They say that it's jarring that the villagers clap at the joke about Farquaad's death, but it's not jarring at all. The villagers live under an egomaniacal genocidal king who denies them free expression. They are told when to cheer or laugh, and after Farquaad's death, it is the first time they were truly allowed to express themselves freely. These are all the arguments for why Lord Farquaad is good. They say his actions might not have necessarily been good or the best per se, but his motivations were pure. But he is shown throughout the movie to have bad motivations. And Type 2 Productions couldn't point to a single time where Lord Farquaad actually cared about the well being of a specific person other than himself. Just a broad desire for a clean kingdom, which I don't think can automatically be seen as a selfless desire, and I don't think can be seen as a selfless desire within the context of this movie. Part 2. Everyone else is evil, apparently.
List out all of the other motivations of the characters in the movie. What does Shrek want? Shrek wants to get rid of the fairy tale creatures that have invaded his home and return to his former lifestyle. That's what he wants. Donkey wants protection from Farquaad's men and to make friends and have companionship. And Fiona wants to break her curse and marry her true love. Now, none of those motivations are bad or evil at all, but all of them are fundamentally self-interested except for Farquaad. Because again, what Farquaad wants is order and perfection for his kingdom.
I think it's reasonable to say that Shrek is self-interested in the beginning of the movie, but Donkey and Fiona literally want love and friendship. Those are very clear pro-social motivations, and if wanting love and friendship is self-interested, then so is wanting a perfect kingdom. But most of their arguments really are about Shrek.
While pretending like he isn't responsible for his horrible reputation. I mean, consider this. He takes tremendous joy in absolutely terrorizing the villagers. I mean, there's an entire music video that plays at the beginning of the movie to demonstrate just how much Shrek loves scaring people.
So here the villagers are actually attacking him, and he scares them off. To warrant a reputation of a dangerous creature, Shrek would actually have to hurt the villagers, but Shrek is never shown hurting a villager. The villagers are 100% the aggressor in this scenario, so it seems insane to say that he is the one terrorizing them. He did not go to their land, they went to his, and he scared them off instead of hurting them.
And not only is Shrek scaring Farquaad's subjects, he kills them and eats them. I mean, he has a jar of eyeballs on his kitchen table and says that the jelly from human eyeballs is actually quite good on toast.
I think this is maybe the second best point in the video, which is really kind of an indictment of the video as a whole. There's no evidence that he actually kills and eats anyone, and if you actually look at the jar of eyes, it's clear that the eyes are all different sizes and shapes, and there's no strong reason to believe they are human eyes, when clearly at least some of them are not human eyes. But there's also no evidence that he kills and eats people beyond just this, like, one gag with some eyes, some of which aren't even human. Maybe none of them are human. And if he did hunt and kill people, wouldn't the perfect time to do so be while he is trying to scare them? Like, if he wants to scare them, wouldn't inflicting violence on them be much scarier than just talking to them a little bit? But he is never shown hurting a villager in the entire movie. Most of their arguments that Shrek is bad from this point on revolve around two claims: one, that he is mean, and the other is that he is a hypocrite.
And I'm sure everyone watching this is familiar with the extremely famous line that Shrek has in this film, where he makes his little speech about how ogres are like onions because they have layers. But watching this as an adult, it rang so hollow because he simply just proclaims it and doesn't elaborate, but we're shown evidence to the contrary throughout this film. Throughout this entire movie, Shrek is bitter, he's selfish, he's mean to everyone, including Donkey, and the only person he treats well is the one girl that he just happened to catch feelings for.
The problem with this is that we are shown that Shrek grows. He learns to love and he learns to become vulnerable and open up to Donkey. There is an entire scene where Donkey and Shrek are looking up at the sky and he opens up. After they rescue Fiona, the only time that Shrek is mean to Donkey is during the miscommunication, when he feels like Donkey betrayed him, which is still part of his broader character arc as he learns to manage interpersonal relationships. I'm also not sure what they were referring to when they say he is mean to everyone, including Donkey, with the exception of Fiona. Fiona and Donkey are basically the only characters Shrek interacts with for more than a single scene. And even they acknowledge that Shrek selflessly saves Donkey.
And the one selfless act that we do have to give Shrek some credit for is he does save Donkey from becoming Dragon's sex slave when they're rescuing Fiona, but this does not make up for how he treats him the other 95% of the movie.
By the way, what a wild thing to include in a children's movie.
Like, seriously, where is a single scene where the supposed good guy, Lord Farquaad, puts himself at risk for another human being? It simply doesn't happen. They also make this insane claim about emotional manipulation.
Shrek is immensely selfish and has no regard for other people. Shrek gives Donkey a YouTube apology video only to get information out of Donkey. He doesn't mean that at all.
Well, he completely emotionally manipulates him because he is shutting Donkey down on every front in terms of continuing his friendship with him until he lets that slip, at which point he pretends to care only to extort that information out of him.
This is simply unhinged. Shrek felt heartbroken and like Donkey had betrayed him until he learns that Fiona was talking about somebody else and Donkey didn't betray him. He apologizes to Donkey and there is no indication that it's an insincere apology. That's simply not what emotional manipulation is, and if anyone else called something similar emotional manipulation, these two would call it woke nonsense. This is a huge moment of growth for Shrek because he's never been close enough to anyone before to realize he was in the wrong and he should seek forgiveness. They say his apology is insincere but offer no reason for believing this. And they ignore the entire context of this movie that leads a reasonable viewer to conclude that it is sincere. But let's take a look at the other claim. Not that Shrek is mean, but that he is hypocritical.
It's rich that Shrek laments the fact that people judge him without getting to know him, yet he doesn't pay that same courtesy to other people. I mean, he repeatedly judges Farquaad for being short, and he also judges Fiona because she didn't act the way he thinks a princess should act. Shrek is a massive hypocrite throughout this whole movie.
There are exactly two scenes which could be understood as Shrek specifically referencing Farquaad's height. One was before he had even met Farquaad, and he just sees a giant tower and says to Donkey, "Do you think he might be compensating for something?" Which to me seems more like a joke about insecure men in general, like the kinds of jokes people make about men with truck nuts. There is, however, one other scene where Shrek unambiguously makes fun of Lord Farquaad's height. Now, I think there is room for a real conversation about body shaming and what is and isn't acceptable, and their broader point that jokes about Lord Farquaad's height probably make the movie worse. But calling Shrek a hypocrite for this doesn't make sense. He doesn't make judgments about Lord Farquaad's character based on his height, and making a couple of jokes about someone's height once is not the same as having villagers try to kill you and being completely excluded from society. Shrek is facing a level of discrimination that Lord Farquaad is not, and even if Shrek does something that, we could conclude is a bad thing that he shouldn't do, that he should maybe outgrow, that doesn't make him a hypocrite for pointing out the much more severe living conditions that have been forced upon him. As for Fiona, he doesn't judge her for not acting like a princess. They're just making this up. I don't know if they misunderstood something about the movie, or they saw something that wasn't there, misremembering something maybe. But the closest that happened is when she burps, he just says, "You're not exactly what I expected." Which he says with a positive tone, to the extent that Shrek did have preconceived notions about Fiona based on her appearances and was hypocritical. This is the part of his character act where he learns not to judge other people and how to form relationships too. And really, it's that he can relate to other people that look like princesses and princes. It's not that they were acting poorly for their status or position. The good characters in the movies, Shrek, Donkey, and Fiona, are not perfect, but they are shown to grow throughout the movie, unlike Farquaad, who engages in no introspection or emotional development. But that's not the only accusation of hypocrisy they levy against the big green man.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to preserve your own home, unless you're ethnically European, of course. Farquaad is portrayed as being evil for exiling the fairy tale creatures, but Shrek literally says once he delivers Fiona back to Farquaad, he's going to build a wall around his swamp. It's funny that people get mad when Farquaad's going to do it, but no one cares when Shrek does it.
What's kind of funny is neither the hero nor the villain in this film wants the illegal immigrants. It's almost like all of us can agree they need to go.
There are two fundamental problems with this. There's a difference between keeping someone off of your private property, like if I know a guy named Tom and he's a real ass, but he hasn't done anything illegal and I want to keep him out of my home, that's fine. It, however, is not fine to try to kick Tom out of the country. These are completely different things, and for some reason, people on the right cannot understand that there is a difference between a house and a country. This also shows that they really don't have any sense of character development. Shrek begins the movie very closed off, and he opens up more to Donkey and Fiona. This scene is right before a big moment where Shrek is very vulnerable with Donkey about how he feels rejected by the world, so he puts up walls, and it's almost like this movie has an ongoing motif of walls being a metaphor for emotional walls or something. They do have a few other minor complaints about Shrek as a character.
He whistles to the dragon to come eat Farquaad, and man, he is entirely in the wrong for even interrupting this marriage to begin with, just because he changed his mind last second.
Right. And to be fair, like Shrek is doing it in self-defense, but it's like if you invade someone else's home and then you proceed to engage in self-defense.
This is the kind of trope where someone interrupts the wedding at the last minute. Obviously, if you have a problem with a marriage, you shouldn't wait until the very last moment, but to say he's entirely in the wrong seems a little strong to me. They also say just because he changed his mind, he does this, but he really didn't. He didn't change his mind. There was a miscommunication, and he thought she didn't love him. And he came as quickly as he could once he learned that wasn't the case. But yeah, let's put this one in the Shrek isn't perfect column. I'm fine with that.
On top of that, Shrek destroys an entire kingdom just to get a crumb of mediocre nookie pop.
Shrek doesn't actually destroy a kingdom. They're just lying here. You could say he killed the king, but the nation won't crumble because one man died. He also did this to protect Fiona, who Lord Farquaad attacked when he learned that she turns into an ogre. They also misrepresent this, saying that other people might try and argue it's in self-defense. Shrek doesn't do this to defend himself. He's doing it to defend Fiona, which is another sign that maybe Farquaad doesn't actually have good intentions. The final complaint they have about Shrek is just this.
On top of that, Shrek doesn't even apologize to Fiona for eavesdropping in on her conversation with Donkey, on top of misunderstanding it because he didn't have the context of who she was speaking about.
I guess he doesn't apologize when there's this miscommunication, but you would think, given the context clues of him coming to declare his love, that Fiona would figure out that he was sorry. The whole conversation explaining exactly how he misunderstood what happened would occur off screen, especially because it would be obvious to Fiona that he hadn't actually heard everything when he was surprised that she becomes an ogre. He would have had that knowledge if there hadn't been this big miscommunication. Part 3, Wronged Conclusions. Overall, Type 2 production seems unwilling to engage with the certain aspects of the movie.
The moment he marries Fiona, she gets fat.
That's actually incredible. What did the movie mean by this? Well, in addition to all those bad things.
I don't know, man. Maybe it means that true beauty is on the inside and that you shouldn't judge people harshly based on their appearances or something like that. It's very clear that the people at Type 2 Productions are not just conservative, but far right, and they let their political beliefs cloud their judgment. They read fairy tale creatures as illegal immigrants, even though they aren't that good of an allegory for illegal immigrants. There is no indication that the fairy tale creatures are from somewhere else or are bad for society or even have a different culture whatsoever. But they still say things like,
Now, you can call me schizo, and to be fair, this is Shrek Schizo Hour, but the more I go back and watch these kids' movies, the more I see the subtle messaging to normalize things like accepting outsiders, even to the detriment of your own people, like we see in this movie. Reinforcing and normalizing a nation's people to embrace outsiders and give no care to things like border security is how you end up with Muhammad being the most popular name for newborns in the UK.
the fairy tale creatures for the creators of Shrek were most likely part of a commentary about Disney. You know, the place that most of them had worked at and had a near monopoly on retelling fairy tales for decades. Lord Farquaad is often said to be based on former Disney CEO Michael Eisner, and the fairy tale creatures might actually symbolize fairy tales controlled by Disney. Of course, I don't think it's necessary to hold this view or analyze the circumstances of the lives of the people making a work of art to interpret it. You can, and I often do, interpret a work based on the work itself, just as many members of the intended audience of this particular movie would have. I don't think children were going to be thinking about the internal politics of Disney watching this. And it is hard to imagine that the people who made Shrek wouldn't see how many people would see the fairy tale creatures as representing marginalized groups as a whole, or even just people who look slightly different or something. Donkey frequently refers to himself and the broader group as freaks, which is a word that has a variety of connotations, particularly with people with disabilities, which I think would be an interesting avenue to explore. But I think it's hard to tie one particular group of people to the fairy tale creatures. Really, it's the most milquetoast generalized message of inclusion imaginable. It's not that tied into actual political thought that affects the real world. Just a general sense of, hey, let's be cool to people even if they're different. Now, I must admit that I do think the people at Type 2 Productions do generally have one good point. It's pretty weird for a movie that supports inclusion and beauty being on the inside to clown so much on a guy for being short. I honestly think that if Lord Farquaad were a normal height, or if they just didn't make so many jokes about his height, the movie would be better. But the vast majority of the analysis is unhinged. Given that there is no minority group as diverse as fairy tale creatures, and obviously no minority group is magical, they really don't seem analogous to anyone, especially to immigrants, because they don't come from another country. But even if they were, we have to ask what is wrong with them and what is wrong with immigrants. As we've already seen, there's really nothing shown to be wrong with the fairy tale creatures in this world, besides maybe a small fraction of them is like slightly more prone to vandalism than the population at large, but I think that's really not a justified opinion. But we get this remark they had about Muhammad being the most popular name in the UK. Now, Muslims are very likely to name their kid Muhammad, so now 6% of the UK is Muslim. Muhammad is a very popular name in the UK. It's the most popular because they name their kids so disproportionately. And I have to ask, what is the harm caused by this? There is no harm caused by a name. And if there were an actual harm they could point to, I would like to think they would point to that. Either there is no better argument they could make against immigration, against what is happening in the US, or even if they wanted to extend it to Europe, there either isn't that argument, or they are refusing to plainly state the strongest form of their argument. But I think this video really does get close to saying the quiet part out loud of what it is they want to say.
And the whole message of the movie is don't judge a book by its cover, which is incredibly stupid. Because the whole purpose of a cover is to inform you of what the contents of the book are.
The cover of a book is a metaphor for someone's physical appearance, particularly given the number of images they show depicting Shrek is connected to blackness, and their reading of the fairy tale creatures as being immigrants. It's clear that when they say the cover is meant to inform you about the contents of the book, what they are saying is that you can judge a person by their appearance, their ethnicity, and their skin color, and that people with certain ethnicities and certain skin colors should not be allowed into society and should be removed. It is the endorsement of a severe and horrendous racism.
Well, you can definitely see in this movie, they want you to be afraid of authoritarians, even authoritarians that are benevolent, that are doing you good, that are fixing your society, even to the point of making them perfect. Shouldn't we want capable, able, courageous, strong leaders to actually fix the problems?
Now, this right here is literally just fascism. They say that it is good to have a benevolent authoritarian who makes everything good, gets rid of the people they don't like, with the appearances they don't like.
Like, if Trump deported all the illegals, cleaned up all the major cities, and got rid of the fent zombies, I would happily worship him as the god emperor of mankind. I wish Trump were like Farquaad.
Really, they are just begging for a boot to lick. They want Trump to be more authoritarian. They want someone like him, but more so. They want a strong fascist to take over everything because they do not believe in the people and the ability of the people to rule themselves. They do not believe in having a constitutional republic because if they did, the idea of a benevolent authoritarian would be obviously ridiculous to them. What we have now is a portion of the American right, the supposedly patriotic part of the American political spectrum, which has abandoned the entirety of the American political system. And I would say they've abandoned the best part of our political system. They've abandoned the idea that no king can rule justly and that all people should be equal under the eyes of the law. Many of their ideas are not defensible with facts. They cannot point to a problem with immigrants in a country where immigrants, including illegal immigrants, are less likely to commit crimes than Americans who are born here. So they must invent a fictional narrative where immigrants are dangerous and criminal. They cannot accept even the most milquetoast message of inclusion in a film without being offended, so they must tie it to the real issue of immigration and carry their fabricated narrative of immigration, of the criminal immigrant, to their reading of this movie, of Shrek, even though what is shown in the movie doesn't support their narrative either. When I first saw this video, I had to wonder if they saw something different in this movie, or if they simply interpreted what they saw differently. But it seems like their interpretation of the movie is disconnected from it. They ignore things within the movie, exaggerate a few things, and add in fantasy motivations that don't make any sense but somehow excuse the evil of the villain. This is a new level of denial. People on the right in the US used to ignore the fact that much of the art they consumed contained messages they did not agree with. Sometimes, like in the case of The Boys, they seem to miss the point. Sometimes, like in the case of Born in the USA, they seem to ignore the idea that there was a message altogether. But this, shall we say, creative reinterpretation seems like a new phenomenon. And I wonder, as we become increasingly divided politically and the people in charge of making most commercial art in the US continue to be on the general trajectory of center-right economic policy with socially progressive ideas, and the far right in the US increasingly becomes more and more authoritarian, I wonder, will fascistic reimaginings of art like this one become more and more common? And now I left a link to the original video in the description if you'd like to form an opinion for yourself. But don't forget to drop me a like before you go, and remember, good night, good day, good onion.